From being a deadly force in the arena with Katniss to both of them losing their families, here's how Gale being reaped instead of peeta would have changed everything. These two would have put survival before anything. When Gary Ross's adaptation of The Hunger Games came out in 2012, it set the whole world on fire with its mind-blowing tale of rebellion. This Suzanne Collins series first kickstarted the dystopian fantasy craze, and its film version became so successful that it earned over $694 million and set brand new records for the opening weekend for an original IP. But even in the midst of all the violence, the twists and turns, the insane clothing and lifestyle of the members of the Capitol, and all that political commentary, The Hunger Games was ultimately a tragic tale of two lovers, or at least that's what millions of fangirls worldwide saw it as. It's true. Much like the citizens of the Capitol, our hearts melted when we saw the love story between our star-crossed lovers, Peeta and Katniss. People were so obsessed with them that they even came up with a ship name, Everlark. The romance between these two is what gave the movie its touch of sweetness. But if Gale was chosen at the reaping instead of Peeta, or had he chosen to volunteer as tribute to protect Miss Everdeen, it's safe to assume that the story of the film would have been a little different. Especially because Gale's nowhere near as sweet or generous as the baker's boy. He was always more of a ruthless hunter, willing to do anything for his family's survival, so it's safe to assume that Gale would be far more aggressive in the arena. If you guys remember correctly, Peeta spent the majority of his time in the 74th Hunger Games either pining over his girl crush, Katniss, or camouflaging himself using skills he'd learned during baking when he'd decorate cakes. So his only real survival skills were his charming lover boy persona, which got him the aid he needed from the citizens of the Capitol, and the fact that this kid knew how to paint. No one even saw him as a real threat, and that's mostly because he wasn't. Peeta was never really in it to win it. In fact, one of his most famous monologues was when he confesses to Katniss that he didn't want the games to change him or to turn him into some kind of monster, and that he'd die happily if he could die as himself. How noble, right? Except, Gale never really had that martyr mentality. In the very first scene, when he's introduced, he expresses his anger against the Capitol and tells Katniss that he knows they can make it together and survive in the wilderness. This kind of confidence only comes if you've seen some dark times. And may I just remind you that, unlike Peeta, Gale didn't come from a well-off family. His mother washed clothes, his father died in a mining accident, and he had 3 younger siblings to take care of. That's precisely why he started hunting when he was a kid, and eventually trained Katniss to do the same when she was just 11 years old, and happened to stumble into one of his rabbit traps. So chances are, Katniss would have been more ruthless with Gale around, because he wouldn't hesitate to help her take out anyone in their way, be it one of the career tributes, or even someone small and harmless, like Rue, for example. And obviously, if Miss Evergreen had her old hunting buddy with her, she'd be far more confident, because these two together make an amazing pair. They know how to communicate using just looks passed between one another. They also have the same go-getter attitude, so chances are, with Gale on the field, the arena would be way more deadly. But then again, while Peeta's presence grounded our heroine, it kept her humanity alive. His existence was a reminder of the value of being nice, since it was Peeta's kindness that had saved her life. Like that one time he gave her bread to eat when she was starving after her dad died, Gale's influence would have taken away any potential for mercy or compassion from her. Remember how tortured she was when she killed Marvel? Well, this guilt, as well as her PTSD, would have been 10 times worse if she'd been with someone like Gale. Oh, and to top all this, if Gale was her ally, Katniss would have never made an alliance with Rue. One of the most heartfelt moments of the games was the unexpected friendship between District 11's 12-year-old, Little Rue, and Katniss. They first became close when Rue saved her life by warning her about a nest of tracker jackers. After that, for a few moments during the games, they decided to stick together until Rue was killed by Marvel. This was the part that got us all sobbing, especially because we saw Katniss's vulnerable side. When she held her former ally in her arms and mourned her death by singing her a lullaby, fans were emotional. Some would even argue that Rue's death was one of the pivotal moments that kick-started the desire for rebellion within Katniss and the residents of District 11. Except, with Gale present, there's a big chance that he'd never let his Katniss become an ally with someone who would only slow them down. He would have picked someone stronger, bigger, and more skilled if he had to choose at all. Rue was just another obstacle in his way to survival, and given his do-or-die attitude, I wouldn't be surprised if Gale would have taken her out himself. So we wouldn't have just missed out on a beautiful, haunting scene, but also the portrayal of Katniss's character would have been far less complex or inspiring. Katniss would just be another piece in the game, fighting to survive. This also means that the star-crossed lover plotline wouldn't take center stage. Even before Katniss and Peeta step into the arena, Haymitch uses the star-crossed lovers narrative to make them popular and increase the hype around his district tributes. That's what made these two stand out to begin with. Peeta even confesses his feelings for her in an interview with Caesar Flickerman in front of the entirety of Panem, long before the start of the 74th Hunger Games. And then again, when the two of them are alone in the cave, Katniss decides to help him out. But the star-crossed lovers plotline isn't only important in the first film, but even in the subsequent parts of the series, Katniss's complex emotions for Peeta only make the story more interesting. And when she's with him, we get to see the softer parts of her, like the first kiss they share in Catching Fire, or when she breaks down after thinking that she may have lost him. The fact that the audience can't really tell at what point the emotions are real, and when they're just for show makes the series way more interesting and adds layers to the characters too. But if Gale replaced Peeta, things would be less complicated to say the least. Even if we assume that the romance between Gale and Katniss would develop in the arena, it would have been far more simplistic than Everlark, because they already knew and trusted each other, so they wouldn't have to navigate the perils of falling in love on the battlefield. Plus, the love triangle element would also be taken away from us. So we can safely say that with Peeta gone, the Hunger Games won't be half as romantic. But then again, both Katniss and Gale may not have survived. The whole reason the showmakers came up with two winners from one district rule was to play on the Everlark romance. So with Peeta gone, there's a chance that Gale and Katniss would have had to face one another in the game at some point. Since Everdeen is the face of the rebellion, it's likely that Gale would have sacrificed himself for her and left her to take care of his family. Do you see how this changes everything about the series? Katniss's rebellion, then, would have been driven by a desire for revenge. And not just for Gale, but also for her family. Because with both of them gone, Katniss and Gale's families would have died. Let's face it, these two kept the families alive by making sure everyone was well fed. Their fathers were dead and their mothers were old. Together, they have 4 younger siblings and 2 old women to provide for. So what are the chances that Gale and Katniss's families learned to fend for themselves while these two were away for the games? Also, the Hunger Games don't even have a fixed length and can go on for a very long time until one tribute survives. So on the occasion that the games lasted for longer than a couple of weeks, the residents of District 12 would probably not be able to feed the families of the tributes for too long, because they're all just poor miners at the end of the day. And no one would expect Prim to learn how to hunt. So, from both of them losing their families to being a deadly force in the arena with Katniss, that's how Gale being reaped instead of Peeta would have changed everything.